ETA Side of Dawn, 33-52-16. David was watching the numbers of the enemy disembarking from their ship. It was getting close to a brigade, and that is too much for the ground teams to handle without some bold and crazy strategy, or his company of irregulars will for sure lose. David looked over to the Villanis terminal. "Can you get me the number of ground forces the Zhao and Erm have?" She nodded back. David looked back to the display. The enemies to the north of the airbase were being strafed, and Hirth and Rick were holding them at bay. In 3 more minutes, that issue will be over. The ground base has become a bastion of safety for the Zhao and Erm, and the ground teams there were holding the enemy attacks back with ease. Choke points are wonderful in a ground-locked war, as long as you aren't the one trying to get through it. David, the Zhao and Erm are still mobilizing what they have left, but they are disorientated. Their commanders are infighting. She trailed off, the realization of what that meant for a resistance effort. Give them the base camp as a 0-0 point. I need them to gather up to the west and start preparing. The enemy is deploying its main forces. He ordered a bit louder, snapping her out of the fear-induced haze. This is bad. He can't hold alone without the Zhao and Erm, but he can't willingly tell the ground teams to die. He needs a backup plan, something unexpected, something odd. David spun to Yayuli. "Get Hans on a shuttle up, along with every xenobiologist that is down there," he ordered. And she hesitated for a second before nodding. If someone can do the crazy hazardous thing David had in mind, it will be Hans. ETA Side of Dawn, 32-046. David watched the display carefully. The enemy's number by their ship was now past a brigade and still growing. He shook his head and thought out his plans. If the Zhao and Erm mobilize in time, then he can force the enemies into a choke between the base and the Zhao and Erm. But that would cost the base camp a lot of casualties, more than he felt was acceptable. The door opened and Hans rushed over. "What do you need? I figure you have a crazy idea or something," he said, a small glint in the doctor's eyes. "Yeah, I need you to make a liquid form of scale rot and tailor it to human genetics only," David said coldly. "What?" Hans paused, his excitement faded. "Why would you want that?" The doctor saw the plan. It is a bold and risky plan, and it relied on the enemy not knowing what it is. Scale rot is barely dangerous to humans, but has a terrible side effect that will take you a day or 2 to get over. Due to the lack of scales to rot, the disease targets anything close, like bones. For a day or 2, movement becomes unbearable. Just lifting your finger can cause you to faint, which is why most humans and community members get a vaccine for it. He will have to apologize to the Zhao Arm later. And David's plan: disperse it over the enemy ship, slow their mobilization, and should buy them more time. Hans looked a bit unsure, but gave David a nod and headed to the labs. ETA Side of Dawn 30-42-23. David, the Zhao Arm have started to reorganize their forces, and they are getting more soldiers coming in from their hideouts, the Villanis called out. "Good, someone! Get the next shuttle down to take a payload of drones to the base camp," David said as he looked around, his eyes landing on a shaky mug held by a nervous-looking Xandra Fane. "Coffee?" the young Xandra Fane said. "Thank you. What's your name?" David said as he took the cup and sipped a bit. It was black with no sugar, not his choice, but perfect. "Kianris, I am the 13th brother of Alaris," he said as he watches David drink. "Good job. I can't leave to sleep, so you are the most important person coming in and out. Do you know why?" David said as he took a second sip. "No. Because without this, I can't stay awake. And if I can't stay awake, then no one leads. You are helping me, so I can help them," David said, then gestured to the ongoing war zone his displays showed. "Now, I'll need a new cup every 6 hours. If you can keep that up, we can win." Kianris grinned and ran off, slipping past the members of command that had just finished their rest and were rushing back in. David saw Alaris come over. Her face showed worry, and she slowly raised his visor. "They are back," she said after rubbing under his eyes, the touch a bit more soothing than David would admit. "Will you be okay?" David nodded carefully before taking a sip more of his coffee. "I'll be fine. Humans can stay awake for a lot longer than this." David looked over to the timer and back. "Besides, I have to hold for 30 more hours. I can handle that." Her uncertainty at his statement still on her face, but David lowered his visor back down. She was right, though. He was already awake for a day now, and he still has 1.5 to go. He set down the cup and looked over the display again. ETA Side of Dawn, 28, 36, 54. David's eyes were taking in all the information they could. The enemies had, for the first time since contact, stopped their attack. For how long, David didn't care. He will use that break. The number by their ship was closing on 1, and a half brigade's way more than he could hold against. If he had to guess, it's because they want to end this in one final battle. They had pressed hard on 3 points just a second ago, but now they were all falling back and away for the front lines. "How many Jiao Unarm have we evacuated?" David asked the Duchess. "Just under 300. They are all being kept safe in Hangar 4. "What are the Jiao Unarm forces' situation like Chelok?" David said as he turned a bit away. "They have reorganized into 1,000 troops so far, but it's all mixed, no uniformed structure," Chelok said back. "That's fine. Tell them to hold for now. I know that's a hard request, but we need time, not heroes," David said back, then turned to face the display again. He tapped at his terminal and called the lab's Hans update. "Yeah, we are working on it. The amount we need is a lot. I think maybe in 2 or 3 hours we will have enough, I am guessing, though," Hans said back. "Okay, thanks," David said before disconnecting. ETA Side of Dawn, 27, 1542. "David, the Jiao Unarm are sending a company to the airbase to relieve the men there," Chelok called out. David shot his eyes to the Vil Annis and then spun around. "Alaris, Alpha, and Bravo teams need to head back to base camp and rest," he ordered, then turned to Janris. "Have your packs do the same." Thank the goddess, with Hirth and Rick back at base, the command issue and discipline should improve, and it looks like the Jiao Unarm had a general with a head on his shoulders down there, which is good. Less for him to worry about. His eyes drifted over to the counter by the enemy ship. They are closing on 2 brigades, and he has no way to slow them down yet. ETA Side of Dawn, 26, 42, 24. David watched the display carefully. The enemies have fallen back on every front, and the ground teams are all taking a rest. Most are eating or taking a nap, but taking a break. Fighting is hard work, and urban warfare is worse. Luckily, they had a good base camp set up. "Chelok, can you ask the Jiao Unarm for a map of all the roads from the enemy ship to the base camp?" David asked out loud. "1 second, the old Vil Annis said. David's eye wandered to the counter by their ship. The enemy has gathered 2 brigades, and the number is still climbing. At the rate they are deploying, there may be a whole division in that ship. "David, new shuttles are coming in. What are their follow-up orders?" asked the Duchess. "The pilots are to take an hour's rest. I don't care if they sleep, eat, or fuck. They need a break, too." "I got the data displaying now," said Chelok, as a web of roads showed on the map. "Alaris, get all 3 fire team on the comm," he spoke. "Patched in," she called back. "Listen up, east of base camp there is a main road, GPS ping to follow. You are to make it a nightmare to use by anything that weighs more than the Jiao Unarm. How copy?" David said out loud. "Good copy," called Hirth. "Good copy," added Rick. "Good copy, and nice to hear from you again," finished Samantha. David waved at Alaris and heard the click of the disconnection. They can buy some time when the enemy starts moving. They are a creative bunch after all. ETA Side of Dawn, 25, 55, 31.